Welcome to the Q&A for the Wings of Redemption Down the Rabbit Hole episode. I have 28 questions all posed by my patrons, and let's get through them. There is quite a bit. I will do my best to be as succinct as possible. First question comes from Deputy Boogie, and they ask, given all of your new recording gear from the Geordie episode, can we expect more live-action content? Maybe. I want to record myself playing the Geordie a little bit more, but generally, when I'm talking about subjects, it's pretty much finished, and there's not a whole lot for me to go out and record. Besides that, it's quite expensive. Now, I will be using some of that recording equipment for a particular video that I want to do this year, but depending on circumstances, may have to be done next year. We'll see. But you'll see what I mean when it comes out, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I would like to do some interviews for a video that's coming up very soon. Kurt Nelson asks, I would like to know your process for decompressing and keeping your spirits up while working on projects such as this, what with all the talk of mental health and depression. For me, the difficulty doesn't really come from the subjects themselves. Now, Terry Davis was probably the most brutal because listening to him talk for so long was mind-numbing after a little while. But that was less so because of the topic and more so just because of his mode of speech. The subjects don't tend to make me so depressed. My real problem that I struggle with is perfectionism. I've been a perfectionist ever since I was little, and it's been very detrimental in many different ways. In some ways it's been okay, but I'd say in most ways it's been detrimental. And I also am very bad about burning myself out after every video, desperately trying to finish it up. And my goal this year, my New Year's resolution, is to be healthier about the way I approach videos. So with luck, you'll be seeing more consistent uploads because I'm going to be taking better care of myself. What would happen with videos before this is I would work really hard on a video, and then I'd be bushed for like 2 weeks. And even when I got back into the next video, it would take a while for me to build myself back up. But then by that point, I'd feel like I'm so far behind on that video that I'd start working like crazy and I'd burn myself out again. So my goal this time is to approach more methodically. And like I was saying, with luck, this should produce more consistent content and hopefully more quality content so that I can every day approach with a fresh mind. Chris Gendo asks, after I watched the episode, I saw you at a call with Jordie during one of his streams, and I was surprised how level-headed and normal it was. That's true, I did have a short call with Jordie. It was about 50 minutes, I think. I got a sense he's grown up and matured a fair bit. If you were ever to do a follow-up on Jordie, would you be open to having him involved on any level? When it comes to topics, unless I've made a serious error and done one too early, I don't like to go back to them. And in terms of having people, my subjects involved, I prefer not to. I prefer to stay as far back from my subjects as possible. The one exception that I made was for game life, because so much information had been lost about game life that an interview with one of the people was practically necessary, and besides, the events were like a decade old or something like that, over a decade old to my memory. It was okay. I felt like that was an okay line to cross at that point. But generally, I want to stay away from my subjects because it gives it an outsider-in viewpoint. So I would say, in general, no. I wouldn't really want him involved. Stephen M. asks, how do you deal with negative criticism? Pretty easily. By the time I started down the rabbit hole, I was pretty comfortable with receiving criticism for any creative work I made. And the way that I tend to approach criticism of any kind, positive and negative, is by categorizing it into 3 categories. The first is, fuck you. This is just something inflammatory that is completely useless. And you can write these off, generally. The second kind is, I personally did not like this. And these are sometimes useful, and you especially want to pay attention if you're getting this comment over and over and over again, about one specific detail. The third kind is, this functionally does not work. And this is probably the most useful kind because these are the comments that will pick apart your work and explain, this doesn't work because of this, and this would probably be better. The trick is that Oftentimes, one kind of criticism will masquerade as another kind. For example, someone might say, "This objectively does not work," when actually what they mean to say is, "I personally did not like this." Like, it's a personal distaste. Also, sometimes these categories can combine. For example, "This objectively does not work. Cutting things together like this is not beneficial to the work. Fuck you." So at that point, you want to ignore the "fuck you," but accept the criticism with about whatever it is that needs to be fixed. I hope that was useful. I'd love to sit down and make an extra video talking a little bit more about this if you guys are interested. Skelechicken asks, "Why do you think Geordie has fallen into such obscurity relative to some other similar figures, like DSP, that you've discussed?" I'm not sure that Geordie has fallen into the obscurity that everyone thinks. I've been keeping an eye on his viewer numbers, and nowadays he's been getting about 700 concurrent viewers on Twitch. A lot of his viewers just migrated, even if his YouTube channel failed. The reason he failed... to break down your question a little bit more... the reason he's obscure on YouTube now is because of an interesting phenomenon. If you look at a lot of the modern day YouTubers, you would be surprised how many of them got their start in Call of Duty commentary. I know that Dr. Disrespect was probably a big surprise, and Keemstar is also sort of an offshoot of that. The reason he fell off is because the Call of Duty commentators that are still around today are people that use their popularity from Call of Duty commentary to launch their careers into something else. They realized that the boat was sinking, so they got on a different boat. And there were some people who just stuck to Call of Duty commentary, and all of those people just sort of disappeared as time went on. Because there simply wasn't as much of a market for it anymore. It was a format that was getting a little bit tired and samey, and there was a glut of it. There was just a massive amount of it. And as people got better at identifying the desires of viewers on YouTube, they would migrate over to those new things. But some people just stuck with Call of Duty, and Jordi was one of those people on that sinking ship. Bo the Tiger asks, "Did you follow or were a fan of Jordi's content in the past?" No. I had no idea who he is until people brought his name up as a potential down the rabbit hole topic. I completely missed the boat on Call of Duty commentary, and I just did not pay attention to it at all. It did not interest me. I have never even played Call of Duty, which made approaching this video quite interesting, and this is true for a lot of down the rabbit hole videos. I generally don't know anything about the subject going in, and then I just dig up as much information as I possibly can, and it's a really wonderful life, to be honest. It's really fun learning about all these strange, disparate topics. Elvis Delaney asks, "In the lead up to this video, you mentioned on Twitter that you've been dissatisfied with your other videos that cover internet celebrities, Spoonie, CWC, etc., and that this new video is a vast improvement. What about those older videos is dissatisfying to you, and what was done differently this time to address those issues?" With my older videos, I would tend to latch on to a single central narrative and perspective and try to keep the video cohesive to that particular narrative with as few offshoots as possible. Also, I would try to keep the video to below 30 minutes if possible. Sometimes, if you've noticed, my videos have gotten longer and longer as time's gone on, and that's because I've realized that to really tell the story of these people, I need more space, and these stories are compelling. I didn't think that people wanted to watch anything longer than 30 minutes max, and boy howdy was I wrong. That's actually why I broke up my anime video into 2 parts, partially because I was on a video per 2-week release schedule, and I wanted to extend it a little bit because the video took so long. And I wanted time to make that second part, and also because I didn't think people were willing to sit and watch my videos past 20 minutes. And when I realized that that wasn't the case, that people would pretty much watch whatever I made, no matter how long it was, as long as I made it entertaining, people would sit around. And not only did I realize I could make it more entertaining, but I could also give more information. Like the DSP episode had so much info cut out of it, and it was so rushed. A lot of my earlier videos were rushed because I was trying to keep to this schedule. But with my newer content, I said, okay, I'm just going to take more time between my videos because I want to bring it up to that next level, and I want to reveal how complicated some of these topics really truly are, and sometimes those topics need space, and Wings of Redemption is basically an apology for those previous videos and showing just how complicated these subjects can be. And multifaceted. So even though there's a single narrative through line in the Wings of Redemption episode, and there's one particular perspective, I also expand it to show that there are even more factors coming in on this, and I try to imply with my scripting that even beyond what I stated, there's more. So just trying to imply the complexity of the situation. Talons of Ice and Fire asks, I remember that back when the Wings of Redemption Down the Rabbit Hole was first released, that some argued internet documentarians have an ethical responsibility for anything that's said or done to the subject matters. While I am ambivalent about the issue, I'm curious about what your opinions are on the role such content creators play in affecting the lives and/or images of your subjects. I don't feel properly equipped to answer this question because I don't feel it's my place to tell other people what is ethical and what is unethical. There are sometimes certain instances where I can be like, wow, that's really shitty, but most of the time, I don't feel it's my place. All I can tell you is the way that I approach the issue. I'm very cognizant of this, and it's something that I'm trying to come to terms with because my channel has grown extremely quickly, and I'm still navigating how to deal with that, because the bigger you get, the more responsibility you take on, to a certain degree, at the very least. For journalism, there comes a point where you ask yourself, is it ethical to talk about this thing at all? And get people talking about it. And I would argue in most cases, telling people that they cannot talk about something isn't ethical. So the ethics of it are like, do you tell someone to shut up and not talk about it? Do you tell them they can only talk about it in a certain way? Or do you say, you can talk about it in any way that you like? The way that I approach these topics is I tend to try to be as fair as possible. I'm not interested in smearing people. I used to be more okay with poking fun at people. I mean, look at the transformation between the Digital Homicide video and even the Chris Chan video and the Wings of Redemption video. The way that I approach video making is vastly different compared to what I used to do. Just because that's what I would prefer to do going forward. Responsibility, yes, but also just as a matter of preference. I hope that that was a satisfactory answer. I also want to note that nowadays, when I make videos on topics, I tend to monitor the situation a little bit to get a feeling of what kind of impact Down the Rabbit Hole viewers have. Because I've noticed that even when I make a video on a topic, it doesn't tend to affect the topic very much. There was a short wave of people, a few dozen people went on to the Per Cat Cafe website. Yes, this Q&A is being recorded after the Per Cat Cafe episode, and yes, I know that this Q&A is abysmally late. But a few dozen people went on to the Per Cat Cafe Facebook page, but by the end of the first week, there were no more new comments. Anyone who went there was there for a drastically short period of time. And that was just to, type, "We have no cats, Kathleen, meow meow purr," and then they left after that. So I'd say that my approach has generally been a proper one, because I don't want to gag myself from talking about any particular subject, because I feel like almost anything has a right to be talked about, especially if the information that is being presented has been made public. But at the same time, I also, for my own sake and my own sanity, want to know how I'm impacting these topics. Kennedy J. Baruch asks, in a very complimentary fashion, "As a filmmaker, I can't help but admire some of your technique, especially in a literal feature-length documentary such as this. Did you go to film school and/or receive some sort of education in filmmaking, or are you more self-taught? And I know you said no second parts, it's fine in this case. But if you are self-taught, I'm really curious about some of your personal inspirations." All of my filmmaking experience, besides Down the Rabbit Hole, most of it at least, comes from high school, where I took some filmmaking classes there, but I also volunteered a ton at the public access station. I would rent out their big shoulder-mounted cameras a ton as well, and I spent tons of time in the studio in every role. Mostly as director, actually, funny enough, for talk shows. So it was there that I got a feeling for how to cut between shots to make a more dry subject a little bit more visually interesting. I'd say that's where a lot of my experience for Down the Rabbit Hole comes from. Just the very basics of cutting from shot to shot, fades, the bare bones essentials. But most of my experience is self-taught though, and the thing I had the most talent and skill in was editing, by far, and that's what I did as a part-time job while I was in high school. I have some really fun stories attributed to that. As for inspirations, I didn't have cable or satellite growing up. No cartoons, no Cartoon Network or anything like that. It was always a treat when I went somewhere else and they had cable or satellite. So I watched a lot of public broadcasting, PBS. And on PBS, my favorite thing to watch was Nova, by far. I enjoyed Magic School Bus and Bill Nye the Science Guy, of course, but I really liked Nova because I didn't feel as talked down to as a child. And so a lot of my inspiration and my influence comes from Nova, as well as other documentaries, of course. They would always play documentaries on public broadcasting, and I loved it. I ate up as much of it as I possibly could. With Nova especially, I admired the way that they would take a subject and essentially string a narrative out of it, which in retrospect, I find very impressive, and it always made it very enjoyable and engaging, and I really try to capture the essence of that in Down the Rabbit Hole. Robert Davis asks, have you received hate for posting this video, and if so, how severe? As in people who think you shouldn't have posted a video about someone who is alive and active, or people who are Geordie antagonizers? Not really. Most of the pushback that I've gotten for Down the Rabbit Hole has come from people who don't watch it. People who watch through it tend to... sometimes they'll say, like, no, I was really dubious about this at first, but after I watched it, I totally get it. Which makes me feel really good. So in general, to answer your question, no. Zamari asks, is there any information regarding the subject that you'd like to share but did not include in the video? I pretty much got everything in that I wanted. There's always more, right? There always is more, but it doesn't always fit the laser focus that I need to have on these subjects, because I kept it as focused as I possibly could on Jordie, and it was still 2 hours and 10 minutes long. I'd say like the three things that I wish I could have included were more about the way that Jordie supported the people that were attacking Woody. I let Woody explain it a little bit, but the way that Jordie was giving money to the person who was insulting Woody incessantly and essentially like clout chasing a little bit, because that was sort of their MO back in the day, as I understand it. There was also, but it just wasn't focused enough on Jordie was the problem. There also was the topic of the way that Jordie superfluously spends money, and how he's really bad with finances. Because even when he has tons and tons of money coming in, it seems to disappear into one thing or another, whether it be a girlfriend or a new car. There's been a lot of talk about him getting a Mustang recently. It was a used Mustang. It apparently was refurbished after being in a wreck, apparently in which the person died. And people, maybe. But they've been talking about that. I kind of wish that I could have talked about it a bit more, but I just couldn't fit it into the script. And I also felt like his trouble with money was illustrated well enough at the very least. Serviceable enough for the subject. I also wish I could have talked a bit more about the way that the PKA members approached each other and sort of got under each other's skin. They got really nasty, especially as they brought on other people. And I understand that it's just sort of, the masculine thing to do is to get under your friend's skin, but sometimes it felt kind of personal. Kyle dealt with it okay. And Woody is a sensitive person, but he has tools to deal with it. But Jordie obviously has very few tools to deal with that kind of thing. He just kind of lets it ruminate. And again, it was too much about PKA, not enough about Jordie, and it would have taken away from the laser focus that I was trying to have on him. Notice MK asks, have subjects of your Down the Rabbit Holes ever reached out to talk to you before Jordie? No, funny enough. And I think it's because my videos have such a small impact on these people's lives that it's enough for them to just ignore it, and frankly, that's how I prefer it. Wapple asks, is there any information you regret including in the video? Not really. The one tentative bit that I have in there is the instance where Jordie is doxing Keemstar and his girlfriend. I could have added more censorship to it to completely block everything out, but at the same time, the censorship that was in that was the censorship that Keemstar himself had provided and had done, because he was the one that released that call. And so I figured at the time, and I'm still kind of iffy on it, I figured, okay, if that's the level of censorship that he's comfortable with on that clip, I'll leave it as it is. Madeline Swan asks, does sifting through so many hours of potentially difficult to watch footage get to you, or do you feel mainly detached from it? I think it depends. I'm pretty resilient. The only time that something really started to get to me was when I mentioned this earlier, was when I was watching so many hours of Terry Davis live stream. But I mean, it's a completely different beast when a man with schizophrenia, like very, very bad and progressed schizophrenia, talk for hours and hours on end. But someone like Jordie is quite different. And let's get one thing straight. I did not watch everything that Jordie has put out, not even close. I didn't feel it was as important this time, because Jordie was the way that Jordie sort of structured his story without intentionally doing it was a series of very large events that occurred, and so I could generally focus on those, and then I would look at the interstitial bits and just sort of get a feeling for what was going on, more so than listening to everything. So Jordie, again, not nearly so bad as Terry Davis. And I also recognized that I probably didn't need to spend as much time in it as I did with Terry. Brandon Mack asks, I'm curious to know why you chose Wings as the topic, what it is about him, his background, his circumstances, etc. that made you think this is the story I want to tell. Because there are a few things that really stood out to me about Jordie. First of all, I thought that he would make a great story, because as I mentioned a little bit earlier, his story is comprised of a few very large moments that occurred. For example, the duel with Syndicate. I knew that was going to be a very dramatic moment. I didn't expect when I was writing the script to go as in-depth with it as I did. I think it was a positive thing. It was a huge risk, but I think it was positive. But basically, his life was a series of events like this, and those stories practically write themselves, and will draw people in. But I also saw a lot of myself in Jordie. That was sort of the personal angle of it, because Jordie, he struggles a lot with his self-image, but he never quite built up the will to surmount them. And as with a lot of my subjects, I see myself in a lot of them, and not entirely, obviously, but certain aspects of myself. And when I can connect to the topic in that way, I feel more well-equipped to approach their story. Those are the two big reasons. Adam D. Goff asks, videos you've made on internet celebrities often deal with the subject of how a person is affected by rapid fame. In your discussion with Jordie, was this something you spoke of or related to him on? If not, what's your view of your own success? I have a very weird story. I did my channel grew very, very quickly compared to most people's. And so in that way I related, but there's a fundamental difference. My channel is not built on my personality in any way, and so I don't have the pressure to perform as a person. Rather, I can just focus on making the content that is very much divorced from my personality. The only times that I break it are, like for something specifically channel related, are these Q&As and the progress reports. And even then, you know, I play it pretty close to the chest, I think. So in that way, it was very, very different. Zephronius asks, while we know the general population liked your video, and how, have you received any pushback from the Wings trolls? Not really. Again, I don't seem to have that big of an impact on my subjects' lives, and so it's pretty easy to just sort of ignore what I make. As I understand it, they liked my video initially, but when I showed sympathy to Jordie on his stream during that short chat I had with him, they decided that they didn't like the video anymore. But because I'm so divorced from my content, it didn't really have a big impact. I'm gonna butcher this name. Torin Quinlivan asks, you used the interview from PKA with Mr. Medicare in this episode, and this isn't the first time you've made a video on the same topic as him. His style is a lot less documentary and a lot more just laughing at the crazy aspects of stories like Terry Davis or Wings. Do you watch those videos, and how do you feel about that kind of style compared to yours? There was a time where I'd watch this content. I feel like I've moved past it at this point. It doesn't interest me nearly so much anymore. Although the subject matters often do, which is why I would watch them in the first place, because while I don't like the approach, the subjects are interesting, and often I would look into these subjects a little bit more and find that they were much more complicated than I first thought. And in some ways, my videos act as a counterpoint, not to the videos themselves, but more as a way of approaching these subjects and recognizing the complexity behind them a lot of the time. Peter Melling asks, we got a taste of the PKA crew during the podcast, especially Woody and Kyle, with Kyle being a potential subject for a Down the Rabbit Hole. True. How would you say your video characterizes their effect on Jordie, and would you have handled them differently with a longer runtime or a separate video? The latter. I would have to do another video on them, because when I was writing the script, I wanted to talk more about PKA, but I realized that PKA really is its own thing, and like the dynamic of the group really plays off of each other and affects each of their own individual careers in a unique way. Partially, like, I'd say launching the career of Woody, in his case. If I were to talk about it properly, it would really need its own episode, because it's really easy to get lost on rabbit trails talking about PKA. I definitely didn't talk about the effect of the podcast as much as I would have liked. Maybe just an extra line or two explaining how Jordie being on the podcast, like, over time, you know, them getting under his skin might have contributed to his insecurity. But again, like, at the same time, I don't want to speculate too much on what could have happened. I want to keep it as obvious as possible. Just stick to the things that are very clear and obvious. So I wouldn't go back and change it. I wish that there was space for it. William Harrison asks, did you seek out any help in making the Syndicate duel sequence, or did you come to that understanding by yourself? I ask because the commentary felt quite complex to somebody who doesn't know a lot about COD. Like I said, I've never played COD at all. My understanding of the game just comes from FPSs in general, and just gaming in general, because I used to be an esports caster before I was making Down the Rabbit Hole, and it was something I was doing, I think even while I was still making Down the Rabbit Hole. Yeah, it is something that I still would occasionally do. But I did a little bit of research in the game, I did a little bit of research on the map and what people had to say about it and the weapons, and was able to draw conclusions based on that. And I was pretty comfortable writing about it because I knew that if I said something that was wrong, my graphic designer would say something, because Arkaxon has played Call of Duty, so he'd be able to call me out and say, like, that's not right. I actually, for the little bit about Jordie saying, I can be a little bitch and just sound whore now, I think he just said, I can be a bitch and sound whore now. I tried to figure out what he was saying because I was not familiar with the term sound whore. So I spent about half an hour listening to that clip over and over again, trying to figure out what he was saying, until eventually I was like, is he saying sound whore? So I looked it up, and turns out, yes, that is a Call of Duty term. So I had to do a lot of research for that segment, but I think it paid off. Don Theodoro de Carvajal asks, I found the Wings of Redemption video made me rather melancholy. His story struck me as being a profoundly tragic one. I wonder if it is perhaps the case that you may also have felt a strong sympathy with him, especially with regards to the intense trolling targeted at him. I have never been subject to the kind of trolling that Wings of Redemption has, and the vast majority of people have not. And after you spend enough time with someone, you do get to identify with them to a certain degree, even if they're an awful person, and who has done awful things. There's a certain amount of familiarity you get with the person. So yeah, absolutely. While the melancholy didn't stop me from working, I definitely did feel it while I was making it. B. Ran asks, after some very kind words, we know Jordie reached out to say he saw the video and saw it as fair. Did anyone else related to this also reach out? Nope. I actually was curious as to whether any of the old PKA crew would reach out to me about it, but I never heard anything, which was interesting to me. William Schulman asks, after again some very kind words, how would you compare/contrast Wings and Boogie 2988? Very similar, and I didn't realize how similar when I was making the video because I was very ignorant of Boogie, but very, very different in one particular aspect. Boogie likes to present himself as this kind, lovable human, and then does weird and gross things when people aren't looking, and that comes through a little bit in his streams when he's more off the cuff. Wings of Redemption tries to act like a big, tough guy, but is actually quite fragile and soft. So in that way, they are opposites, even if their stories parallel each other's very closely. Friendly Samoyed asks, great name, hey Frederick, will you ever do a Down the Rabbit Hole on Maddox and his feud with Dick Masterson? It fits the category and Digibro had done a lecture on it already, but I think your presentation will give this topic an interesting take. I nowadays like to wait for a topic to be more complete and finished, and as I understand it, Maddox and Dick are still going at it, so I'm going to wait a little bit longer before I decide whether or not I'm going to make a video. But I agree, there is potentially a lot to be dissected there. Twiddle Chungus asks, which Liquid Richard album is your personal favorite? I'm partial to Band World. I like the classics. Innovation Elite asks, given Keemstar's history with the FAG channel and his prior history with Wings, were you taken aback at all with Keemstar's apparent desire to help Jordie during the livestream with El Presador? Not really. Keemstar tends to do and incite what will make the best story, and in this case, offering help to Jordie, by far, made the better story. So not really. Hi Arcaxon! He asks, hey Fredo, what's the hardest thing you had to research in this video, if any info was harder to find, that is? I don't think anything was terribly difficult to find. There was always an archive of something if I really needed it. The biggest thing was sifting through the comments of the old videos because people would reply to each other, but because of the way that YouTube has restructured, all of those threads are super, chunked out and messed up. So sifting through those was a little bit tricky and trying to figure out what was going on, but it was, I'd say this was one of the easier, if not time-consuming episodes to make. Now, again, typically I only let people ask one question, but Talons asked another really good one that I think is a great way to cap off this Q&A. Do you have any advice for those who are in situations similar to the ones Jordie faces, whether it's an unhealthy lifestyle and a bad financial situation, or having a hobby or pastime you've grown to hate? There's always a way out. That's probably the best advice I can give. There's always a way out, you just have to find it. Jordie, in his case, he felt like everything was hopeless and he could not conquer anything else, like any part of himself, and get past where he was, and so he just gave up. But there's always a way out, even if the situation is really grim. sometimes that means writing out something bad and looking forward to what's coming and what could potentially be there and laying the groundwork for something better. Sometimes it's just muscling through it and choosing to do something different. But there's always a way. Thank you very much, everyone. I think I managed to keep this to oh god, I didn't keep this a reasonable length. This is 40 minutes. I hope that I could answer some of your questions. These have been really good questions. I'm very, very happy to answer all of them, and I will see you all again very soon. Thank you again to all of my patrons who are supporting me and who took the time to ask these questions and give me the chance to explore the topic a little bit further. And to also give me the opportunity to do this as a full-time job. It takes away a lot of the uncertainty with ad revenue on Down the Rabbit Hole. I've considered what I would do if, like, I got completely demonetized or YouTube completely banned me for one reason or another. God knows what the algorithm will do to you. And I realized I could probably still just keep making Down the Rabbit Hole because people have been so generous to me on Patreon. And I just find a new platform. So thank you very, very much, everyone.